Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, also a warm welcome on behalf of the German Embassy, and we thank the Campus Sylvanska for partnering with us. And we have the honor actually, right, to start off the first evening of this new series. And we very much welcome Kateřina Králová from Charles University as our first speaker. Our aim is to introduce scholars who work in the other countries, so to say. And Kateřina actually is from Charles University, but you are currently in Berlin as a Humboldt scholar. So she's Czech, but she is in Germany. And next time we, of course, hope to find a German who works in the Czech Republic. So just to introduce you, Kateřina started off her studies, I think, with international area studies here at Charles University. And now there is the German connection, although you speak an Austrian accent. So you studied politics and Germanistics, so German language, at Marburg. Then she did her doctorate in social sciences, again here at Charles University. Kateřina has held already several prestigious scholarships in Vienna, in I think Thessaloniki, right? Also at Yale University in the United States. Now the prestigious Humboldt Scholarship in Berlin. Kateřina focuses on, of course, Holocaust studies, but especially the perception, right, of the Holocaust. And this is also the topic of today. The title is Telling the Holocaust History Without Witnesses. We very much look forward to that. But before you start with your presentation, your talk, we wanted to ask you 3 questions, right? Because the Café Collaborations, it's about collaboration and it's about scholars who cross the border. So I wanted to ask you 3 questions first. While working in a different country, so it doesn't have to be necessarily Germany, right? But what has been your most impressive experience?
Well, I mean, as you heard already, being and going from one country to another is something which opened to me exactly at the moment where the Cold War was to be over. And it was an incredible experience. Coming from a small town very close to the Austrian borders, for a long time it meant I was virtually at the border, but never allowed to cross. And then from one moment to the other, I was able to go to museums and to all possible events, to make friendships and to make connections and to create my community across the borders. So yes, German as a language and Austria as a country became to me much closer from South Moravia, from Znojmo, than Prague, in fact. And for a long time, it was the question, will I study in Vienna or will I study in Prague? And then, you know, it was somehow in my cards that I ended up here in Prague, but I started next to area studies to study German philology as well at the Charles University. And keeping the German language alive was one of the aims I had. And that's what brought me later on to Marburg, to the Philipps University in Marburg. And then something incredible happened to me, because I should have spent only 1 semester in Germany, but I was invited to become a student assistant for international students at the Philipps University in Marburg. And that was area studies life, because whatever question I had, I was able to communicate it with people from those countries. And I realized that this global community, it's something where I belong. So Germany opened my horizons.
The second question would be, what is for you a characteristics of Germany, I mean of the German research landscape, the universities? Maybe also in comparison to the Czech landscape.
Well, I have been in the business, so to say, for some years now, and before that I was a student, and the landscape is changing very much. So I have to admit, when I started to study, my first foreign language was German. And it was as good as impossible to pursue any sort of research or studies or talks in Germany and also in Austria in other languages than in German. now it's getting truly globalized. And I'm so happy that I was able to come to you from Bavaria, where I was holding and co-organizing academic week for young scholars from all over Europe, but predominantly from Southeast Europe and Germany, speaking all in English and many other languages, be the languages of ex-Yugoslavia or Central Europe or Greek, which is one of the languages I mastered, but not the other ones. So it's amazing to see how globalized the environment is becoming lately, and how many opportunities are opening also in humanities and social sciences for scholars who may hesitate going to Germany because of German. And we have huge borders with German-speaking countries. And sometimes we are thinking the language is a limit because maybe I mastered English or French or some other language. But now seeing this trend helps me also to connect not only across Europe, but to bring into these connections my students and my young colleagues as well, who may not speak fluent English, but who are very bright and very communicative and can communicate with my colleagues in Germany in English or in another language.
Well, that almost answers maybe my last question. What can you advise young scholars or students? What kind of advice would you give, also in terms of going abroad?
Well, maybe I am not the usual example, but I do see that going abroad is always a challenge. It's a challenge on every age. Back there is sitting my 10-year-old daughter, and she is here with me, but she is also with me in Berlin, and she was with me in the United States and with my husband, of course. And some scholars may feel, now that I have family, I cannot go, or now that I have boyfriend and girlfriend as a student, it may be restricting or wrong for our relationship. I think it was always an enrichment, and just don't be scared. You know, the things will come up as they should come up, and it's always the best and most enriching experience.
Yeah, thank you very much for this introduction, and now we're looking forward to your talk, right? Telling the Holocaust history without witnesses. How can we still draw lessons from the Holocaust now in the 21st century? Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming. I drafted a schedule of what I would like to communicate with you, and I have a presentation. My presentation, unlike most of the presentations I usually do about the Holocaust, doesn't have any pictures which would traumatize you, so I will not announce any special announcement, and I hope it will also open a floor for many questions, because what I see as the best thing about Café... That's a nice fanfare for the opening of the talk. So what I see as a special enrichment of what we are doing is the communication and the debate we can have here all together. And of course, as the longer I am in this, so to say, academic business, the more questions are popping out. And I will try to share today with you some of the questions. And I would say all of these questions are time and place specific. They relate to political events, and I don't need to discuss with you to which at the very moment, because I guess we are all overwhelmed about what happened this weekend. And we also know that there will elections in Germany, which will also shape Europe as we know it, and also shape the memory studies and memory politics across Europe. But it is also technological progress which plays a role where, you know, it's hard to imagine for my daughter that I had to go home every time I wanted to call somebody, and somebody else had to be at home to answer my call, and that we can video transfer any image we capture at the moment. But it is also related to the course of my own life, and I think this is shaping and forming the questions I am asking. So one question, for example, afflicts me in connection with the quote of the American philosopher George Santayana, how to remember our grandparents and how to get them remembered for our children and for the children of our children. And it's not only my dilemma, of course, but how to frame these memories to make them matter. How to witness without living survivors in case of the Holocaust, for example, but in many other historical events as well. It is fascinating that when I was preparing my talk this spring, where I was asked by the representatives of the German embassy, and I'm very grateful to Jana Lachman who invited me, and I'm humbled to be the first one to present here. I couldn't imagine that so many things touching upon this issue will happen in the upcoming months. So now, after the Demjanjuk trial, 10 years later, a 100-year-old SS guard goes in court in Germany for assisting in the murder of about 3,500 prisoners at Sachsenhausen near Berlin. In fact, no distance from where I am living now, where I am encountering everyday life, where I am seeing how the city developed, and it developed extensively. It was hard to recognize Berlin after what I have in my recollections from the 90s. And the Nazi secretary at the Stutthofken, Irmgard Buchner, age 96, escapes in that very moment from her nursing home to avoid justice, only to get eventually caught in Hamburg. Her trial is being rescheduled for 19 October in a week to come. These may be the last two Nazi perpetrators to face justice. But what is the lesson to learn out of it? And of course, I'm open for future discussion, maybe during our Q&A. Today, we are coming out of the Eichmann trial courtrooms and the execution of justice in illiberal democracies, slowly but surely, into the digital age of witnessing holograms. This is a picture from one of the studios where one of the Holocaust survivors is being filmed from different angles and then can be exposed to public, also at the moment where he or she, in other cases, won't be around anymore. We are really coming from an era of witness, as Hyb4City called it, towards an era of users, which also opens a new question. How will those users behave, and how we will use the memory which is being captured in books, in art, in videos, maybe perhaps even in holograms and virtual reality. Technology, like it or not, allows us in these days to remember and work with memory sources in ways never seen before. And I'm very happy that also at the Charles University we have chances to work across disciplines. And sometimes it may feel like anthropologists can work with historians and with sociologists, but to cross to other fields, like in case of the mathematical physical faculty, where as a branch of the so-called Spielberg archive with about more than 53,000 of testimonies, or better to say eyewitness accounts, because these people didn't testify. It wasn't a court. They wanted to share their memory. You can all access them once you enter that still 3D space, and some of them, if you enter the digital space and use them for teaching and for studying. And it's also interesting to see that this immense amount of data is not here only for social scientists and humanities, as you could imagine, but that this data is also giving the possibility to develop digital language recognition, etc., etc. So somehow we are both enriching what we are doing and bringing the things over to make a new meaning, and hopefully a meaningful meaning. When I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking that about my stay at the US Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and about my visit 25 years after opening its doors to public. Back then, the Holocaust Memorial Museum went beyond the exclamation, "never again," for obvious reasons. Back then, a separate exhibition at the museum was about the war in Syria, and it was very hard to say never again, facing what we were facing those days. Unfortunately, we are in a similar situation right now, seeing what is happening in Afghanistan and just being afraid and fearful of where it can lead. So Holocaust Memorial Museum started to open new questions. Why do people hate? And why did not more neighbors and friends help? But there are scholars challenging these obvious questions, such as Leah David, asking if the connection of the Holocaust with humanitarianism and human rights does not also serve as a cover and apology for the memory politics of illiberal regimes or democracies, illiberal democracies, as Orban once framed his rule. And Dirk Moses, an Australian scholar who now changed to the United States and is teaching Holocaust and genocide studies and publishing on that widely, recently provoked German public in the debate when he called the Holocaust memory politics in Germany the German catechism. Yes, again, we can challenge and speculate about both. But in the end of the day, what is preoccupying me and many others is how to keep the relevance of the Holocaust memory for us and for the generations to come. Palacio, the author of the bestseller Wonder, and I have to say that my daughter really loved the book, and also the other one, White Bird. In her recent graphic novel, White Bird, from which you can see the cover, and from which I took the prologue and epilogue pictures and the quotes, connected a Holocaust survivor story to the Trump's migration politics and to the problem of migration and tolerance today. The Israeli film director Ari Folman, who became famous for his long-featured animated cartoon Dance with Bashir, which was also released in Czech cinemas, and I hope this movie we will be able to see in cinema as well, retells in his movie Where is Anne Frank, the story of Anne Frank from the perspective of Anne's imaginary friend Kitty. He also places the plot into what is happening around us today by questioning if we are not losing touch with Anne Frank's actual sentiments, kindness and compassion. This brings me to a recent event in Greece, the country mostly in the center of my research. In March 2021, a mural graffiti, which you can see down in this slide, was installed on a panel fence around a train station from which 78 years ago, over 50,000 Jews were deported from Thessaloniki to Auschwitz. Most of them never returned because they were murdered. This piece of commemoration was almost immediately vandalized, as you can see on the other picture in the center. But what struck me as much as the act of the vandalism was the reflection of the locals on the installation, which they almost exclusively referred to and appreciated as a beautification project. And I am asking, what kind of memory politics, of commemorative acts are on display to us and how we reflect to them? Is it still with compassion, or is it the kind of beautification of larger projects which are wanted by other authorities and which are appreciated maybe in a more global frame or in a European frame? Again, there are many studies right now on this topic, on museums and the commemoration of the Holocaust and World War II, on the presentation of genocide and double genocide. We are still to wait to see something like this in Czech Republic, maybe unless we go to the Theresienstadt Memorial, but, or to the memorial in Lety. But how to integrate these memories, these traumas, how to have a lesson learned from the history, not only for us, maybe as I see the age of us, the last generation to have still a living survivor or to remember still a living survivor of World War II. But what will happen after that? With Anne Frank's words, I therefore ask and wish to open our discussion here. How can we prevent wrongdoing, but also misconceptions of the past from happening again and again? Thank you.
Thank you very much.